there's a lot of confusion about what empiricism is. The empiricists, like Locke and Hume and others, contrary to illusions, they believed in innate structure. And the reason is they were not idiots.
In 1957, Burrhus Frederick Skinner published a book called Verbal Behavior, which described Skinner's theory of language acquisition. He believed that language was acquired in the same way all behaviors are acquired, through association and reinforcement. For example, a child wants a cookie and reaches for it. His mother prompts him with the word cookie, which the child then repeats. The mother then rewards the child with the cookie. Thus, the association between the word cookie and the meaning of the word is reinforced. Skinner also extends this theory to nonverbal language, such as body language, gestures, and other signals. For example, a knock at the door signals that you want someone to open the door. Pointing to a desired object indicates that you want that object. Verbal behavior was a reflection of the behavioralist zeitgeist that defined psychology during this portion of the 20th century.
2 years later, in 1959, the linguist Noam Chomsky responded to Skinner's book with his article, Review of Skinner's Verbal Behavior. In it, he asserted that Skinner's behaviorist theory of language could not explain the immense linguistic knowledge that children acquire. This assertion came to be known as the poverty of stimulus theory, which stated that there is not enough linguistic information in the environment alone to account for the complexity of language. Instead, he believed that there must be an innate system within the brain that organizes and expands upon the relative sparsity of linguistic stimuli that children are exposed to. He called this innate system universal grammar. This theory directly challenged the behaviorist viewpoint, which had dominated theories of language and psychology up until this point.
If you look at that, as far as the review of Skinner was concerned, almost 95% of it was just running through claims that he was making and arguing that these are totally absurd, based on nothing. I mean, I did at the very end of the review say, look, there's another way of looking at this, which comes out of mainstream biology. Mainstream biology just takes for granted that every capacity, you know, your visual system, your ability to walk, whatever it may be, is based on some genetic property. I mean, that's not even discussed. And that's, in linguistics, it happens to be called poverty of stimulus, but it's universal. That's just a biological truism. And it's presumably no reason to doubt that it's also true of language. I think it is.
Chomsky's review was an instant hit and propelled cognitive psychology into the limelight. Skinner responded to Chomsky's enthusiastic reception with dignified academic humility.
Well, let me tell you about Chomsky. I published Verbal Behavior in 1957. In 1958, I received a 55-page typewritten review by someone whom I had never heard of, named Noam Chomsky. I read half a dozen pages and saw that he had missed the point of my book and read no further. In 1959, I received a reprint from a journal called Language, reduced now to 32 pages in type, and saw that it was the same review by this unknown character, and so I put it aside without reading it. Then, of course, Chomsky's star rose. Chomsky's review of my book began to be widely cited and reproduced, reprinted. It became much better known than my book. And then word got around, why was I not answering it? Well, by that time, I had no inclination to do so at all. In the first place, if I were to answer it, I should have had to read it. And I had no intention of doing that.
Despite Skinner's complaints, the ship of universal grammar had sailed. Some critics of Chomsky did accuse him of armchair science, as he never produced an empirical evidence to support his theory of universal grammar. Nevertheless, behaviorism still found itself pushed aside in favor of a more cognitive approach to language, as well as to psychology in general. This may be due in part to the fact that Skinner never formally responded to Chomsky's assertions.
This controversy still rages on in psychology today. It also sparked the flame of the ongoing conflict between the relative importance of environmental and innate influences on behavior. This debate has expanded to all types of behavior in what we now call the nature-nurture debate.
Tiptoe by the window, that is where I'll be. Come tiptoe through the tulips with me. Oh,
So this is an interesting debate. I think it really touches on sort of the human side of science, right? So like how personalities can kind of be an important factor in the way that we think about science, sort of. Because I really don't think that this controversy would have been a controversy if it hadn't been for the fact that Chomsky and Skinner hated each other like so much. I think they were both scientifically limited because Skinner refused to acknowledge Chomsky, right? So like ideally they would have kind of collaborated and looked at the data and kind of come up with a solution to the problem, but Skinner refused to do that. And then Chomsky didn't even have data to look at. He had no empirical evidence for his theories. So I think there was that, for one thing.
But I think the scientific dialogue was happening in that they were sharing theories that kind of explained different areas of human nature.
Right, the contemporary version of this debate, we've actually sort of addressed it because it's no longer is it nurture, is it nature? We've kind of come together to look at both sides of this theory and how they influence each other, not like one side or the other, which I think is what was happening when this was more of a nascent topic.
I think you definitely see that in cognitive behavioral psychology. I think that they come together in just a way that they complement, and so one may not fully explain something, but it can use the weaknesses and the strengths of the other one to further psychology. I think that is our biggest strong point right now, is in that area.
Right. I mean, for example, epigenetics, right? I think that's the prime example of where nurture and nature collide. And I wonder where that field would be if we hadn't had this debate in the first place, right?
We're definitely seeing in cognitive neuroscience. I mean, you see these areas of the brain that kind of specialize in certain
things.
And so I think that's the biggest. That's one of the biggest things, is like these areas are specialized in a certain thing, but they're modulated by experience, right, and how and they're rewired based on what you experience in the outside
brain
world.
plasticity.
I think we in psychology have come very far in like using these two ideas to our benefit.
And I mean, it makes for good sitting on YouTube for an hour watching these two have at each other.
I think they're fascinating individuals.
Hilarious.
They're great.
Both kind of assholes a little bit.
That's what makes science sometimes fun, is just like being out there, just an asshole, and just
being an asshole out there doing science.
I think we wouldn't be able to get our like point of view across if we weren't assholes about it.
Right.
Like I think that's like being strong in your world.
Right.
Is what makes ideas solid.
Right. And I think the process of science needs to be empirical. It needs to be based on research and on evidence, but it's also, science is performed by humans, and so inherently you kind of have that emotional aspect to it, which makes it fun.
Because in this case, it opened us up to a whole new world.
A whole new world. I think that's a good place to end. Thank you, Wes.